Hello, good morning everybody. Those of you who have joined us, I trust you can hear me okay. It's just before 11 o'clock, it's just about to click over. I was going to give it just a few seconds for any stragglers to join us, and then I'll kick off and hand over to Mark from Landmark. So give me just 25, 30 seconds or so, and we'll be back with you and we'll start the webinar. Right, okay, good morning folks. We're going to kick off. My name's Jonny Davey. I'm product manager at Geodesys, and you're here this morning. Thanks for joining us. We know you're very busy. We certainly are, and I'm sure you all are out there in the field. We wish we were in a room together and we'd be treating you to some cakes or bacon butties or something like that, but unfortunately this is the best we can do. Again, thanks for your attendance. We really do appreciate it. Geodesys are doing a series of these webinars at the moment out there, so keep an eye out for any future invites or notification of other webinars. We think you find them useful. Today's is in partnership with one of our senior partners, Landmark. Landmark really are producing at the moment sort of gold standard of searches in various areas. Mark Taylor will be talking you through flood risk this morning. Mark knows all there is about flood, much more so than me. I'm just going to finish up in a second and disappear and hand over to Mark. I want you to please imagine we're in a room and I'm swapping my laptop for his laptop. There might just be a temporary black screen or a fiddling around, and then Mark will be in control. And then I'll perhaps pop in at the very end again to close down. A bit of housekeeping. I'll keep an eye out for any questions you may wish to ask. You can type questions in the Q&A area of the Zoom call. And if I can know or find out the answer, then of course I'll let you know straight away. But if it's something I need to take away and consult with Mark or others, then I will, and we'll come back to you directly. A copy of the slides will be available afterwards. We'll email those around to all the attendees and anyone else who's registered. If colleagues haven't been able to make it, they'll also get a copy of the slides. And a bit of final housekeeping. We're all doing this from perhaps remotely from home. I certainly am. I have got a 4-year-old marauding around the house in the background. So if I am talking or involved at all and there's any background noise, then apologies. But it's Otis, my 4-year-old, and I can only apologize in advance, but it should be okay. So without further ado, I'm going to hand across to Mark Taylor, who'll take control of the slides, and it's his voice you'll hear next. And again, just excuse this slight pause while we pass the baton. Thanks again for attending, and here comes Mark. Okay, Mark, if you're there now, you should be the host.
I've received the host. I'm just checking I can scroll through the slides. It's not letting me scroll through.
Right, as we suggested. So if you also share your screen, then I'll stop sharing mine.
Yep, sure. I'll do that now. Share. Right, so about everyone. So can we start this presentation? Wonderful.
There we go. Super. Cool. Thanks, Mark. Off you
Thanks,
go.
everyone. So thanks, Jonny. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well and that the snow isn't being too disruptive where you are. As Jonny said, my name's Mark, and I've been with Landmark and or Gyle for around 11 years now. And during this time, a big focus of mine has been around flood risk reporting. And before my current role, I actually was an environmental consultant down at Argyll, and I led the team of flood risk consultants, determining what our tolerance was as a business, what our methodology and our risk model should do, and I helped develop the human element of our assessments, which we'll just go on to discuss later on. But what is clear to me is that while flood risk is increasingly becoming a more important issue, as we'd expect, the assessment of risk most commonly used, especially in residential conveyancing, I'm referring to risk screening, does not really reflect the importance of the issue. And so in today's 30-minute session, firstly, I'll introduce the scale of the risk in the UK. We introduce what the Law Society practice note says and what language it uses. But the main focus, which we'll pick up towards the end, is what a conveyancer really should expect and what we think they should obtain when looking at flood risk. And that is a human-driven assessment, not a computer-driven assessment, which screening provides. So firstly, starting off with the kind of the stats behind flood risk in the UK, you may be very familiar with these figures as they've been used to reflect the scale of risk for a while now. However, what I would emphasize is that this isn't susceptibility. This isn't could be risk. 5.2 million properties in the UK are at risk of flooding based upon a certain return period of an event. Within these figures, 560,000 properties are deemed to be at a significant risk, or what you would class as high, if you're dealing with a landmark report. And these are the properties that without flood re, obviously based upon certain circumstances, would find it very difficult to find insurance cover. Another aspect of this is that groundwater risk is still a bit of an unknown. It is now estimated that around 424,000 properties are at risk of groundwater flooding, as models have improved over the last 5-6 years from providers such as Geodesys. But again, its relationship with other sources of flooding is also key, and this is only going to be exacerbated by groundwater flooding, by climate change. At the moment, if we look at what the average cost is from an economic damage standpoint, it's around £1.4 billion each year. 0.6 billion pounds it costs us on maintaining and developing new flood defences. And if we look at new homes and where they're being built, while some areas are going to be understandably developed in flood risk areas, you think of the gentrification of urban environments, there's still around 1 in 10 new homes being constructed in land with a very high level of flood risk. And from an environment agency standpoint, this would probably be classed as flood zone 3. So we are still developing in these areas where risk is innate and ever present. Looking at climate change, there are factoring in the impact of climate change. The issue is only going to worsen with more frequent and ferocious events in any given year. Since 1910, there have been 7 record-breaking rainfall months since then, but 9 of those have come since 2000. Looking ahead to 2050, which is the distance that we earmark for the Paris Agreement, by this time, 1 in 3 properties are expected to be risk, which will be over 10 million properties. So the extent of risk in the UK is only going to worsen. Because of this, it is projected that the EA flood defence budget is going to have to nearly double to 1 billion per year. And with flood re ending before this time, it's still a bit of an unknown about how property is going to be insurable when flood re comes to the end in the 2030s, apologies. And if we look at flooding in the UK, flooding is widespread and it happens all across the UK. But if you think about the locations that we have settled, can you name a major town or city that's not located on a major river, an estuary, or the coast? You'd be very, very hard pushed. Really, it's only Birmingham that comes to mind without this. And instead of that, it has a network of canals. And we've exacerbated the risk of flooding across where we've settled because of old sewer networks that haven't been updated. Some locations, especially in places like London, have a combined storm and sewer system, which has to deal with an incredible amount of volume. Hard standing in our urban areas, it's only recently that permeable paving has become a thing. Hard standing significantly increases runoff and stops the natural infiltration of rainfall and runoff in the environment. And we've been accustomed to hard engineering resolving all our issues. It's not just channeling watercourses, although that's a big contributor because it shortens the river stretch and increases velocity, reducing capacity. But also, we think we haven't engaged in more natural ways of flood risk management. We are still almost stuck in that element of building high seawalls or building river or defending our towns through physical concrete defences. And I think this has almost led to a strange perception of risk. Yes, we're very aware that areas of the country are at risk of flooding. But if we look at a case like this, granted, I know this is London, the River Thames being the biggest river in the UK and being tied as well, it presents a very big risk. And if we look at pictures like this, we often think this is never going to happen. This is beyond the realms of possible, even with climate change. This is something out of some sort of terrifying movie like 2012 or The Day After Tomorrow, which is really touching on the unrealistic. But really, actually, this isn't something like that. This is a hidden reality that we don't really look to very often. We do see this as something that's never going to happen, but the biggest city in the country is at quite a significant risk of flooding. It's only because of engineering projects such as the Thames Barrier out of the Thames estuary that London hasn't flooded several times in the past 50 years. Down on the bottom right, you can see on the slide the light blue area around London encompassing City Airport, the Isle of Dogs and the O2 development, think of the commercial space in that area. The whole of Canary Wharf, down by Tower Bridge and Millwall football ground, importantly. If the Thames Barrier wasn't there, this is the extreme flood outline for central London, well, for central East London. And that's encompassing a huge economical important area, not just housing. And on top of that, think of the infrastructure network that operates in that space. Think of the tube lines and things like that. If the Thames Barrier wasn't there, significant parts of London will have likely have flooded in the last 30, 40 years, causing major disruption, not just to people's lives, but to the economy. And it didn't take too long in 2021 for the UK to experience, its first storm of the year. Fortunately, for most, Storm Christoph, wasn't too bad. And whilst there was a lot of flood warnings and flood alerts across the country, most focused to the North Midlands and the North, flooding was quite limited. But there were impacts felt in the north of England and parts of Wales. But flood defences largely did their jobs. However, the risk caused by the potential for flooding still resulted in major disruption. Some 2,000 people were evacuated from their homes in Manchester. Again, East Anglia wasn't too badly affected. However, there were several flood alerts affecting a number of watercourses in the area. It's not all doom and gloom, though. The government has pledged significant investment in flood defence schemes across the UK, with a large focus on coastal defences to better protect large parts of the country. 5.2 billion investment has been planned by central government for the EA to create around 2,000 new flood and new coastal defences to better protect over 300,000 properties in England by 2027. So that sounds like significant investment. But if we go back to the figures we were talking about earlier, I do note that does sound like a lot, but it's only around 260 million above the average spending per year. And it's 240 million off of where we think we're going to need to be by 2050 when we hit that £1 billion mark. So it is above average, but it's not, out the realms of the significant investment that we know we're going to need. In recent years, Lowestoft Flood Management Programme has been seeking funding to deliver a flood risk management scheme that will significantly reduce the risk to economic activity, jobs, houses, utilities, and other key infrastructure, the target being protection for the next 100 years. The town saw quite bad flooding back in 2013, with 158 homes flooded and 233 commercial properties flooded during December 2013. With that, Lowestoft has received significant funding to build the Lowestoft tidal barrier, £43 million in total, and this will provide the tidal barrier and flood walls protect key infrastructure and businesses, providing a boost to the offshore energy and tourism sectors. So it's a great project for the area. I do note, though, that this won't completely eradicate flooding. It's not just the tidal influence that sees flooding in the area and along the channel. In 2015 and 2019, surface water flooding was also experienced in the town. So whilst it should provide protection from one source and one mechanism of flooding, that's never the end picture. There's still sources of flooding that we'll likely experience in the area. Moving on to what the Law Society says. So the Law Society Practice Note was first released in 2013 and was most recently updated in last year, to beginning of 2020. Despite that, there isn't too much mention of the impacts of climate change on the UK, which is quite strange given, all the talk that's happened really since around 2017 on the impacts of climate change, especially around flood risk. However, Section 1 clearly sets out the importance of reporting on flood risk during the conveyancing process. It states that flooding is a growing risk for British property. Aside from the physical damage, if property is at risk, it was in an area of risk, it could be difficult to obtain a mortgage, to obtain insurance, to sell, and all of which, is likely to affect the value of a property and impact someone's investments. However, if we look at section 3, I do feel the language then gets a bit soft, and I personally feel that, if we look at the impacts of flood risk, it is worth more than a consideration to mention. This is something that really should be undertaken in every transaction. But the key point that I want to make to you from what the Law Society Practice Note states is that under section 4.3 in the commercial searches section, it states that the market for flood searches is not regulated, and this is correct. There are different types of searches available with variations in cost, quality, range, analysis, and interpretation of data. And this leads very nicely on to what Loie Galbart said, and we may be born equal, but we're not equally talented. And you need to be aware that flood reports can differ dramatically. Yes, they all look the same, and yes, they all sound the same, and yes, they give you a professional opinion and overall risk, but they do things in some instances quite differently, which will result in different assessments, some leading to more past assessments and more pragmatic advice than others. And I think the key thing that I want to note that, as professionals using these reports to inform a client's spending, buying a house is the biggest investment most of us will ever make, and living in London, I'm nowhere near being able to afford that yet. An assessment by a consultant, by someone who understands data and knows its limitations, is always going to be better than a computer providing a risk screen. So defining risk screening. So really, when I talk about risk screening, what I'm referring to is any report or any assessment that's just being driven by a computer. So regardless of how that works and regardless of what the outcome is, that assessment has not been scrutinized by a person, it has not been scrutinized in terms of its accuracy. It is just the output of a computer algorithm and a computer model. And this is how the vast majority of flood reports in the residential market work. And there are some quite distinct limitations to risk screening as an approach, listed down the right-hand side. So results can over-exaggerate risk. It cannot quantify or really qualify whether or not the risk that it's projecting is going to be representative of the property. And that's because it has no interpretation of data. Whatever crosses that line of that property, that is going to be reported regardless of whether it's actually representative of the site as a whole. And that's because risk models at the moment are just not sophisticated enough. And inevitably, that ability to over-exaggerate risk because of a lack of interpretation, is going to lead to delays. It's going to lead to more further actions and more cost really for your clients, which we want to avoid where possible. So what should a conveyancer really expect from a flood report? So again, there are different types of searches available with marked variations in the cost, quality, range, and analysis and interpretation of data. And really what we want to do is to tell you that you don't need to settle for risk screening. There are products out there where you can cut out inaccuracies, you can cut out confusion, you can reduce further action rates and reduce the delays and costs that associate with that back and forth for the client because you have, a red flag on that property, and for a lot of people, flooding is a big issue and is going to raise a lot of concerns. Instead of that, we can provide, more reliable assessments that are reviewed by people, relevant to the property, not next to, and only providing relevant advice and only further actions when, there is a justifiable reason to. This is, it's making sure that the assessment and a property that we're providing is tailored to the risk that actually exists, not just what data says. And this is what Landmark do. And so over the last few years, we've developed reports that they're no longer just automated risk assessments where a high risk may exist. So this is unique to the residential conveyancing space. And our flood reports, RiskView Residential and Landmark Flood, are not just flood risk model provided assessments. The module is there just to alert a site to a consultant for review if a high risk could potentially exist. And we think this is the minimum a conveyancer should expect. This is the modern approach to conveyancing, using data to identify where these problem areas are and then scrutinizing them by an expert. So this concept of full assessment, which is, I suppose, almost dogged reports in the conveyancing industry, I think needs to stop. And it stops being seen as the pinnacle of what's out there, because full assessments can just be a screen. It doesn't necessarily include the level of involvement of a person that Landmark do. So again, data to interpretation, not just data. So, it's not just relying on the output of a model. It's not just relying on the extents of data. It's reviewing that information in relation to where the property is, the size of that property, and its proximity to watercourses and things like that to build a better picture of what risk can be. And at the end of the day, giving the flexibility of what the overall assessment will be to the expert before receiving a report. And looking at the RiskView product, this is what we provide in this report. It's beyond this full analysis. We provide a semi-automated risk assessment, which will provide you with a more reliable assessment, more accurate results, and overall, for your benefit, it's going to result in less issues. And to prove that, the stats below really show this. And obviously, we analyze, we keep track of our pass fail rates and things like this to make sure that we know what our tolerance is and to make sure that we are being consistent with our overall assessments. But if we look at, let's say we just look at a risk screen, so an automated output of risk. And so we know this because of the models we follow. If we just relied on data, we would have around 14 to 15% of our total flood searches identifying a high risk and a further action. So that red strip potentially causing an issue for that transaction. Because of the process we follow now, those 14 to 15% of our total orders are now sent to our consultants down in Brighton, the Argyle consultants, for review. Of this volume, we then reduce 45%. So after the consultant review, we're actually only failing between 7 to 8% of our total searches that we receive. That's quite a stark difference. So of 1,000 searches, as opposed to 14 to 15%, we're reducing. We're only failing around 7, 8%. So it's a big difference, and it is the difference between you as a conveyancer receiving a further action, having a difficult conversation with your client, trying to advise them on what the next course of action is, potentially having to pass that to an insurer or the lender, which then can cause wider problems in terms of securing insurance or securing a mortgage. We are reducing that just through adding in this consultant involvement for our reports. And it's important just to reiterate that we're not doing this at extra cost. Our reports are not significantly higher than other competitors. This is basically a free of charge service for when we provide a flood assessment to you. So looking at the product RiskView, just in general, what it does is effectively provide you with complete environmental due diligence at a flat fee of £83. So no more variation in costs. You cover off all environmental risks at a flat fee instead of having to react to risk alerts or to warnings either through Geodesys platform or via the report you receive. So what it's going to do is make your process more efficient. You are going to see time and cost savings. Time savings from the back and the forth of the client to be discussed, but cost savings in searches. Those delays are also going to result in a higher burden on dealing with that transaction, which we can cut out right at the beginning. The professional opinion of the report is written with you in mind. It's there at the front, just after the front page, for it to be referred to and to be pulled out for the report on title, without having to rely on analysing data in the back of the report or uploading the unique viewer that we have on our reports. That is there for anyone who's interested. It's effectively our data section and provides it a geospatial way, which makes it easier to interpret, but by no means do you have to look at it to get to your answers. And it also comes with market-leading services. So if there's a delay in your transaction, something might come up, which means that there's a delay over 3 months, then get in contact with us and we'll rerun that report for you free of charge. We'll refresh the data just so you have a more up-to-date report on that case. And we also provide 250k remediation contribution, which is the highest in the market in case a risk does pop up and a contaminated land notice is served. But also sit behind it as well, there are market-leading assessments and data that are only going to benefit you and either save you time or give you better assessments. And we've already discussed the flood risk assessment process in this webinar, but later down the line with Geodesys, we will be looking at the planning application data we have, which has been a great initiative that we did during lockdown, converting point features into polygons to make the interpretation of plan data a lot quicker and a lot easier. But also some wider data sets such as subsidence claim data, adding value to subsidence risk and actually tempering the results you get from the BGS GeoShore data, which is largely driven by the geological type. And basically what our mantra is we want to help help you understand the past in the transaction, supporting you in the present with market leading assessments, and leading the future with unique changes that we continue to make. There are lots of kind words out there for the product that we have. This is one from Dexter Montague, and they recommend Landmark RiskView Residential with every transaction they do, basically to ensure compliance and and comprehensive due diligence for all their clients in every case. But that's it from me. I've only 30 minutes, which I'm proud of, because usually I end up waffling on for a lot longer. But thank you so much for your time. Any questions you have, we might have time to answer a couple now, but please send them to Jonny and I, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you about the product in more detail and more specifics.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks ever so much. You can leave your slides up there and stay in control. And so, yeah, if anybody's got any questions, any queries, would like anything, like I say, you will get the slides sent to you as a follow-up from the webinar for registering and attending. And so I'll stay here, and Mark will we'll be muted, but we'll just stay around for just a couple of minutes in case anyone has any questions, and we'll answer them on the fly if we can. But if not, after sort of 4 or 5 minutes, we'll close this down. And thank you ever so much again for attending. We do appreciate how busy you all are, and look out for other webinar invites in the future. Mark, thanks ever so much. I think it was a great presentation, nice and clear, all the salient points covered. So appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, thanks again, everybody. Speak to you again soon.